Viewer advisory. This video contains rapid-fire image cuts that may not be everybody's cup of tea, or coffee, or whatever caffeinated fuel is keeping you operational. Also, be prepared. There will be visual puns. Lots of them. The good, the bad, and why would you even say that? And yes, fully loaded, unapologetic 80s dad jokes. Delivered by a certified senior who grew up when LOL was something you actually did out loud. Younger viewers, you've been warned. But also, welcome. Think of this as a cultural field trip to a time before Wi-Fi, when our humor had no buffering, just consequences. Proceed with caution. Eric Lenscher, better known as Magneto, the guy who doesn't just bend metal, he's ripping adamantium out of bones, knocking out the entire planet with an EMP, even messing with the Earth's magnetic poles so badly he triggers worldwide cataclysms, including drowning Manhattan under a catastrophic tidal wave. Yeah, not exactly someone you'd pick a fight with, even on your best day. So with that in mind, you'd think that giving those exact same powers to a Transformer, a robot, from a metal world where everyone is made of metal, would basically create the most seriously overpowered and dangerous bot in existence. And yet, for some reason, it didn't. If you clicked on this video, chances are you already know the story of the Transformers. And no, I'm not talking about how the Autobots and Decepticons left Cybertron, crashed on Earth, woke up in the 80s, and just went right back to robot-on-robot carnage over Energon like nothing happened. No, I'm talking about the other story. The one where Hasbro went across the ocean to Japan, saw what Takara was cooking, and said, yeah, we'll take those. Brought them back to the US, and introduced them to the world as Transformers. But here's the thing. Did you know that not everybody in that first wave of robots in disguise actually started in Japan? In fact, a few of them were born in the USA, shipped off to Japan, folded into Takara's toy line, and then sent right back to America. Let me tell you about the Mysterians. Back in 1982, American toy company Knickerbocker was already putting together their own line of transforming robots. They had the concept, the gimmick, even early talks lined up with DC and later Marvel for a supporting comic. So yeah, they were pretty much going all in. The Mysterians themselves were split into sub-factions depending on what they transformed into. You had the Hidden Force Mysterians turning into geometric shapes. Real cutting-edge stuff. Absolute peak childhood entertainment. And then, thankfully, you had the Mobile Force, who turned into actual recognizable Earth vehicles. We had G-Par, a rugged off-road vehicle, Blazar, a pickup, Truckar, a semi-truck cab, and finally, Speedar, a sports car. Unfortunately, things didn't quite work out for the Mysterians. Knickerbocker hit some serious financial trouble and eventually got absorbed by Hasbro, and somewhere in all that corporate reshuffling, the vehicle molds and designs for the Mobile Force guys were either sold, transferred, or licensed over to Takara in Japan, where they were folded into the new Microman, Microchains line under the Minicar Robo banner. And just like that, they found themselves right where Hasbro would eventually find them when they came knocking, ready to be pulled into the very first wave of Transformers. Anyway, if the early promo art didn't already give it away, G-Bar eventually became the Autobot hunk Brawn, Blazar turned into the resident grump Gears, Truckar became the whiny homesick Huffer, and Speedar, that one would be christened as Windcharger. That's 4 of the original 6 Autobot mini cars right there. And even standing next to Bumblebee and Cliffjumper, these guys just felt different. And that's where their Mysterian roots really show. For starters, you've got that very obvious M stamped right into the plastic chassis of Brawn, Gears, and Huffer, a literal leftover from their previous life. But more than that, their whole design language leans hard into that old-school, boxy 1950s sci-fi look, instead of the more humanoid, anime-inspired faces you'd see from Takara's Diaclone line. And once you notice it, you can't unsee it. Brawn, Gears, Huffer, and Windcharger all have those heavy visors, faceplates that almost Cylon-esque vibe going on, making them look way more alien compared to the Autobots like Jazz, Prowler, Ironhide, who felt a lot more human by comparison. Anyway, while Brawn, Gears, and Huffer have all more or less found their place in the fandom and made their respective marks. Okay, well, maybe not Huffer. One thing's been pretty consistent. Windcharger is usually the odd bot out. The one who gets the least spotlight, the least recognition, and the one people kind of forget is even there. Which is honestly weird, if you ask me, because out of those four, his alt mode, the 1982 Pontiac Trans Am, is easily the most iconic. We're talking peak American muscle, sleek, futuristic styling. The kind of car that didn't just exist in pop culture, it owned it. And if that wasn't enough, its status got completely turbo boosted thanks to Kit from Knight Rider. So yeah, Mysterian origins and an iconic alt mode, you'd think that's a winning combo. So what happened? Well, to answer that, we kind of have to start with who Windcharger actually is, or more specifically, what he can do. Because in a way that leads into the answer to our question. As mentioned earlier, Windcharger was one of the original 6 Autobot minicars introduced in that first wave of Transformers back in 1984. And like pretty much everyone else in that lineup, he came from that initial batch of toys handed over to Marvel writer Bob Budiansky, who over one very chaotic Thanksgiving weekend in 1983 was tasked with coming up with names, personalities, and abilities for the entire cast. Basically, Budiansky ended up laying down the psychological blueprint for the Transformers universe, writing the now iconic tech specs that showed up on the back of every single toy. Fortunately, even under pressure and with barely any time to think, Bob Budiansky didn't just phone it in with random names and personalities. He actually leaned into it, building characters off their alt modes, their roles, even clever word mashups that meant something. And Windcharger is a perfect example of that. The name alone already tells you what you're getting. Speed, air rushing past, and this underlying sense of built-up energy just waiting to discharge. According to his tech spec, Windcharger is the absolute fastest Autobot on the ground over short distances. 0 to 60 almost instantly, with the only real limit being whether his tires can actually grip the road. But instead of just making him a one-note speedster, Budiansky balanced that out with a pretty major flaw. The guy has like zero patience. His brain moves as fast as his body. He sees something, decides instantly, and acts without really thinking it through. Quick action equals quick victory. That's his whole deal. And what's worse, he'll get super fired up about something and then completely lose interest a few hours later. From where I'm from, we call that ningaskugon. Starting strong, then burning out just as fast. In more modern terms, yeah, that's basically ADD-coded behavior. It makes him unreliable in long, drawn-out missions, but incredibly effective when you need someone to move now and deal with the consequences later. So that covers the wind part of his name, but what about the charger? That's where things get interesting, because Windcharger actually has a superpower, the ability to generate and control electromagnetic fields. In robot mode, his arms act like the positive and negative poles of a massive, highly controlled magnet. No Sheikah slate needed here. He can project that field up to 700 feet, lifting 10-ton chunks of steel, pulling enemies in, or launching them away like projectiles. And up close, it gets nasty. His magnetic field becomes so concentrated it can literally tear metal apart at the molecular level. Yeah, which doesn't bode well for anyone made out of steel. Like, I don't know, Decepticons? So, speed and magnetism. At first glance, that sounds like a weird combo, like what do magnets have to do with going fast? But it actually tracks more than you'd think. So, let's just say you have absolutely no idea how bullet trains work. In real-world engineering, things like alternators and electric motors rely on magnetism to generate motion and energy. An alternator spins a magnetic field to keep your car's battery charged, while electric motors use magnetic forces to create continuous movement. So, pairing insane acceleration with electromagnetic power, there's actually some logic there. The idea is that Windcharger's speed is being driven by this internal system built around magnetic energy. His movement is basically a byproduct of that power, which means his name works on two levels. Windcharger isn't just about speed, it's also about what's happening under the hood. He's not just fast, he's literally charging himself as he moves. But yeah, in case all that scientific engineering mumbo-jumbo kind of flew right past you, I'm pretty sure the whole tear metal apart at the molecular level bit didn't. Because when you really think about it, Windcharger's power set should make him one of the most dangerous Transformers in existence. I mean, a master of magnetism in a world where everyone is made out of metal? The destructive potential there is just ridiculous. From a storytelling standpoint, that's basically handing one character God mode. Left unchecked, Windcharger could be pulling off a full-on Magneto, as illustrated in this children's book, where Windcharger grabs Starscream with his huge arms and squeezing him with such magnetic might that the Decepticons screamed for the very last time. So, obviously, they couldn't let that slide. And this is where Budiansky kinda pulls a genius move, because while Windcharger can generate insane magnetic power, the energy cost is absolutely brutal. His whole system is built for short, explosive bursts, not sustained output. I mean, granted, if he really tried and applied himself, he could theoretically improve his control. But with his impulsive zero-patience personality, yeah, not gonna happen. Windcharger just doesn't have the discipline to regulate or develop his superpower properly. So, what happens? He overdoes it a lot, pushes powers too far, and his systems just start frying. Massive internal short circuits, complete overload. The lore even describes him stumbling off the battlefield reeking of ozone and burned insulation, basically running on fumes, needing immediate repairs and a nice tall chilled glass of dielectric oil just to get back to baseline. It's actually kind of perfect. You've got this potentially game-breaking ability kept in check by both physics and personality. In other words, they took what might be one of the most powerful Transformers ever and very deliberately nerfed him, while still holding on to that potential for one big game-changing self-sacrificing moment that, well, never really came. Because as far as Windcharger's story goes, he doesn't really have one. He's there, part of the original ARC crew, but almost never in the spotlight. In fact, in the original G1 cartoon, Windcharger holds this unfortunate distinction of being the only 1984 Autobot who doesn't get a proper name drop, or even a showcase of his abilities during the pilot, more than meets the eye. I mean, he was supposed to. There was actually a deleted scene where he helps Brawn and Huffer put out an oil rig fire. Small moment, but at least it was something. Without that, his big contribution ends up being posing as a human scientist, revealing himself to the Decepticons like some low-budget Clark Kent, and then promptly getting his ass kicked by Reflector. He doesn't even get a proper speaking line until episode 6, Divide and Conquer. And after that, he's mostly background support, usually paired up with Brawn. You see that dynamic in Fire on the Mountain, where they're on a mission in Peru. While Brawn is out there treating Soundwave as his personal ride and taking direct hits from Megatron, Windcharger's got his back. Well, actually, he skedaddles. Just kidding. He returns just in time to bail his buddy out. Oh, and he even gets a bit of payback on Reflector. To be fair, he does get a few more solid moments. In a prime problem, he gets the rare opportunity to be the human ally Spike's auto buddy for the episode. And he survives a fall into this explosive crystal crevasse by using his quick thinking and transforming mid-drop, using his tires as insulation to avoid getting blown up, and climbing his way out to warn the others. And in episodes like The Ultimate Doom Part 2 and A Plague of Insecticons, we finally see his magnetic powers in action, pulling Bumblebee out of a chasm and throwing up a magnetic repulsion field to block incoming shrapnel. But arguably his best moment That comes later in Masquerade, where a group of Autobots disguise themselves as the Stunticons, and Windcharger ends up playing a key role in holding their combined form together, literally using his magnetism to keep the team intact while posing as Menasor. It's a clever use of his abilities. And then, 1986 happens. The Transformers, the movie. And just like that, Windcharger is gone. Killed off-screen during the Battle of Autobot City, you only see his body, chest blown up, afterwards. And as rough as that sounds, it was actually the nicer version because the original plan had him blasted into the air and ripped apart mid-flight by Cyclonus and his armada, with all his body parts raining down onto poor Blaster below. And that pretty much spells the end for Windcharger in animation. Or does it? We'll just chalk that surprise background appearance up to an animation glitch. Windcharger definitely died, and we know that for a fact because his death is actually what kicks off the events of the Japanese vinyl text story told through the accompanying manga of the toy line. And over there, Windcharger finally gets something a lot closer to an actual story. This version leans way more personal, almost fate-driven. Wheeljack has his vision that Windcharger is destined to die in 2005, and just to make things worse, he sees himself dead right next to him. So naturally, he decides to try and change the future. He builds not one, but two new bodies for Windcharger, both based on the Honda S2000. But of course, nothing goes according to plan. The transport shuttle holding the bodies disappears, and one of them ends up hosting a future spark, Black Arachnia, and the other gets corrupted by Unicron, turning it into Decepticharge. In the end, Windcharger finally gets his upgrade just in time to deal with the mess, and in that final showdown, he goes all out, unleashing the full force of his magnetic powers in a last-ditch effort to stop Decepticharge. Not Black Arachnia though, because yeah, that's a whole different story. But in the process, he seemingly takes both himself and his evil double out. So yeah, I guess Windcharger did get his moment after all. And speaking of moments, this feels like the perfect moment for my obligatory plug. So if you've been enjoying the stuff on this channel, maybe consider helping me out a little more and becoming a member. As a friend of the Toy Shelf, you'll get shout-outs, early access, and the occasional exclusive content, all for the very hefty price of $1. Yeah, one. That's it, Pansit. All you've got to do is hit that join button on the homepage and you're a go. Sago. Hey, am I in the zone or what? Tokwat? Baboy. Sorry. But hey, however you choose to support the channel will genuinely be appreciated. So, thank you. Anyway, since we've already touched on the topic, let's move on to Windcharger's other comic appearances. Now, aside from the fact that he debuted in the US Marvel Comics as a giant, just kidding, it was basically just a big old can of whoop in the original run. That being said, Windcharger did get a proper spotlight moment in the Marvel UK comics. In Raiders of the Last Arc, pretty slick there with the title, Mr. Furman. During a Decepticon attack, the Ark's damaged computer, Auntie, goes rogue and starts trapping everyone, Autobots and Decepticons alike, using magnetic forces. And because of his own abilities, Windcharger ends up being one of the only ones unaffected, alongside Ravage, who apparently uses electromagnetic fields to stealthily sneak around as well. So yeah, this unlikely pair begrudgingly works together. Windcharger takes down a Guardian robot like more than twice or thrice his size, and Ravage takes down Auntie. And as a bonus, Windcharger straight up saves Optimus Prime by using his magnetism to hurl Megatron out of the Autobot base, like straight out of the volcano. I mean, that's a boss move. Of course, it nearly fries him in the process because we all know the guy can't be too powerful. But still, it's one of those rare moments where his powers don't just help, they end the problem. And it's kind of fitting that it happens in the UK comics, where the background characters and deep cuts usually get their chance to shine. Speaking of which, Years later, another comics publisher would build a reputation of doing exactly that, taking obscure, third string, maybe fourth string characters and turning them into fan favorites. This should have been the perfect place for Windcharger to finally break out. But yeah, not quite. That's not to say he was ignored though. In the IDW continuity, Windcharger actually gets a more defined role early on as what's called an outlier, a transformer with an ability that doesn't match their alt mode. In his case, those magnetic arms he casually calls his magic arms. Problem is, that kind of mutation is frowned upon by Cybertron's ruling class, so he keeps it hidden and ends up at the Jackson Academy of Advanced Technology, a sort of safe haven where he can learn to develop his mutation away from any discrimination. Sounds kind of familiar, don't you think? Sorry. And this academy is run by Senator Shockwave, back when he was still a scientist and not yet the cold, logic-obsessed Decepticon we all know. And, I mean, come on, love. Windcharger and the other outliers eventually link up with Orion Pax, future Optimus Prime, for a high-risk heist against the corrupt Senate. And during that mission, Windcharger actually gets to show off a bit, using his powers to bypass security systems via magnetically levitating platform and even prevent a catastrophic explosion when a bomb disguised as the Matrix gets dropped. Unfortunately, by the end of the mission, the Academy gets destroyed. Shockwave is arrested and, well, reprogrammed. And just like that, Windcharger loses the one place and the one mentor that gave him purpose. But from there, he sticks with Orion Pax as things escalate into a full-blown war. He joins the Autobots, fights alongside Prime, and unfortunately, that's kind of where he fades back into the crowd again. Despite volunteering, despite trying to stand out, he just keeps getting passed over by bots who are, well, faster, and I guess have more magnetic personalities. Ironically, it's an IDW's often ignored 2019 reboot where we probably get the best version of Windcharger. Not because of some deep character arc, but because we finally see what he can really do when the gloves come off. Here, he's part of the Companions of Pyra Magna, an elite Autobot unit, and more importantly, he's feared. Like, feared. Enough that a Decepticon seeker straight up bails at the mention of his name. And the ones who don't, well, they learn real quick because Windcharger wastes no time showing exactly why he has that reputation, literally tearing apart a poor seeker named Nacelle who sticks around. And later, he goes up against another seeker, the Rainmaker Nova Storm, who actually manages to resist him at first and even drags him through a structure mid-flight. But then Windcharger adapts and then ends it by using his magnetism more precisely, more internally, crushing her from the inside out. Yeah, that's Windcharger at full power, which just makes you wonder what could have been had they just let him off the leash from the start. I mean, this is one dude you would not want to toy around with, which I guess finally brings us to the toys. Now, I've already mentioned the original Windcharger toy and talked about his Mysterian origins back in '82. But another thing worth mentioning is that how that original mold kept living on, getting recolored, repurposed, and straight up turned into entirely new characters. Take 1985 for example. Over in Brazil, toy company Estrella released their own version of Transformers and suddenly Windcharger became Camaro. Yeah, somewhere along the way, Pontiac Trans Am got lost in translation and turned into a Chevy Camaro. And the name just stuck. The toy came in the usual red and gray plus a white variant and even made its way to Argentina with a couple more color swaps. Later on, Camaro actually gets folded into the wider Transformers lore as part of the Malignus Revolutionary Army, basically a group of hot-headed, trigger-happy bots which include Zipe and Pickup, who themselves are recolors of Brawn and Gears respectively. Then in 2002, we got another redeco in black and gray named Rook, And instead of a frontline fighter, he's a journalist, like full-on war correspondent. Doesn't pick sides, talks to Autobots and Decepticons alike, and somehow manages to convince both factions to stand down during a major siege. So yeah, that Windcharger mold went from ripping metal apart to reporting the news. Now, jumping to 2004, we get Windcharger's first modern update in the Alternators line. And does this one have a story to tell? Because technically, it wasn't even supposed to be Windcharger. The Honda S2000 body was originally meant for the Omnibot Overdrive, but legal issues said nope, and so Windcharger's name got slapped on instead. That's why the head doesn't quite match. It wasn't designed for him. Meanwhile, an actual Alternator's Windcharger was planned as a retool of the Alternator's Grimlock, who transformed into a Mustang, but that ended up becoming Wheeljack. And the real Windcharger head sculpt? That eventually gets used for Decepticharge. Yeah, not the greatest of names, but I mean, what else would you call an evil Windcharger? And it doesn't stop there. That same mold was supposed to get released as Black Widow, but was cancelled, and then eventually released as RC. Yeah, okay, but anyway, so back to Windcharger. 2010 gives us a pretty solid Scout class figure in the Reveal the Shield line, complete with flip-out electromagnetic arm cannons. A couple years later, that same toy was released in Japan's United line in a 2-pack with an evil Windcharger named Wipeout, a grease gun-wielding Decepticon who serves Triptychon. Then in 2015's Combiner Wars, we got a rather scrawny Legends version because it's actually a retool of Tailgate, who ironically was originally a Windcharger retool back in the day, but thanks to IDW, Tailgate ended up becoming the more popular one. I guess those are the perks for hooking up with Cyclonus, am I right? Anyway, in 2018, we finally got a more proper looking Legends Windcharger with a new gimmick. Flip open the hood, throw in a Titan Master, fun! And then in 2026, Windcharger finally got a deluxe class release in the Studio Series 86 line. You know, in honor of his appearance in the movie. Thankfully, with his chest still intact. And that pretty much covers the main Chug lineup. Now for the Masterpiece, you've got one option. Just one. And unfortunately, it's not a good one. Back in 2016, third-party company X-Transbots gave us Boost, one of their earliest attempts, and oh boy, this thing is rough. Somehow they took a super simple Minibot transformation, pulled out the arms, flipped the legs over, and turned it into this over-engineered nightmare. Like, I get it, Masterpiece figures are supposed to be complex, but this is next-level bull caca design. And the wild part, they reissued it multiple times and didn't really fix anything. So yeah, poor Windcharger. That's been your only Masterpiece option for years. But that's finally about to change because hopefully, before the year's out, we are finally getting Fans Toys FT63 Turbo. And look, I'm expecting it to be a bit of a challenge to transform as well because, you know, Fans Toys. But there is no way it can be worse than Boost. And even if it somehow is, please God no, at the very least, based on these renders, Turbo looks miles better than Boost. Hey, Turbo Boost? Oh, okay, that can't be a coincidence. Anyway, speaking of iconic cars, did you know that Kit from Knight Rider actually became a Transformer? But he's not the only one. Meet Gigawatt, the Back to the Future crossover DeLorean, which is basically a retool of Siege Sideswipe. If you want to know more about Gigawatt and the whole lineup of Lambo Brother retools, I've got that story right here. Or if you want my latest video, that's over here. Either way, thanks for watching and I hope to hear from you in the comments below. Do you think Windcharger was done dirty by being nerfed? Go ahead and tell me your story.